Welcome. Today is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and this year's theme is Building Back Better towards an inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID-19 world by, for, and with persons with disabilities. People with disabilities are disproportionately affected by the health, social, and economic consequences of the global pandemic. Our collective efforts for universal access to essential services, including health and social protection, education, digital infrastructure, accessible information, employment, and so on, so that persons with disabilities are not left behind in this time of crisis. Now, before we continue, please note that there are language options available today. If you click on the globe on the lower right of the Zoom screen, there will be an option for Spanish, English, and French. And you will also notice a Q&A question and answer button. And I encourage you to submit your questions here. We hope to find time during our panel to get to some of your questions. Lastly, if you face any technical difficulties, please message in the chat, and hopefully the UNESCO technical team will be able to help. Now, UNESCO has had a week of events. This panel is entitled Share Your Story for Development. And there is an online platform called Story for Development. 4 is the number 4.org, supported by the Nippon Foundation of Japan and established by UNESCO, with the view of collecting stories about persons with disabilities around the world and how they have made an impact in their respective political, economic, academic, and social spaces. These stories collectively serve as case studies and data for governments, organizations, civil society, the private sector, and just the curious person with access to the internet to act and to learn from. Now, there are some like 100 entries on the website, and in the next hour, we'll have a chance to speak to just a handful of those sharing their stories on that website. I'm going to introduce our panelists today, but before I do so, I want to throw up a poll. It is available in English, Spanish, and French. Just scroll down if you don't see the language you're most familiar with. Spanish is question number 2, French is question number 3, and if the audience can answer it, meanwhile, I'll introduce our panelists. So stand by as I go ahead and do that. The question is, choose the 3 most relevant factors from the list below that enabled your personal empowerment. So hopefully I launched this poll correctly. It is the first time I have done so. I'll put this to the side. Please answer. And meanwhile, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists. Today we have Maria Soledad Cisternes Reyes. She is a lawyer and a former special envoy on disability and accessibility for the United Nations. She has worked to increase access for people with disabilities in Chile and globally, and she was on the committee that drafted the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We also have David Barnes, who is Director of Access and Inclusion Services and co-founder of Global Symbols. He has extensive experience in the area of accessible design and has an interest in emerging technologies and the impact upon the daily lives of people with disabilities. This includes the use of AI to augment communication and automation, and also emerging technologies and mobility and the use of innovation to build resilient services for people during the pandemic. We also have with us Ludovine Munoz, who is a 3-time Paralympic champion and head of the Paralympic integration at the Paris 2024 Organizing Committee for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. By age 13, she was the youngest member of the French swim team. She won 1 gold, 3 silver, and 1 bronze at the Atlanta Games in 1996, was awarded the Legion of Honor, the youngest French woman ever to receive that distinction, and she pursued a degree in business and has been working in the corporate world after her sports career. We also have Zainab Chinakamvala, who is the head of membership in Asia and Africa for Benetech's Bookshare initiative. It's the world's largest library of accessible ebooks for people with reading barriers, and she joined in the early days of Bookshare's international expansion and has played an integral role in helping grow the company's presence in India and beyond. She has a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's in French and spent many years as a translator and French language teacher. And we also have Jason Felipe Aristizabal, who is the founder of Azordis Valley, an organization supporting people with disabilities in the Agua Blanca district, one of the poorest areas in Cali, Colombia. He holds 2 degrees in law and social communication, and he is a big believer in digital technologies as a powerful tool to access information and knowledge for people with disabilities. I noticed that I put the poll up, the results popped up meanwhile, although I did not click end poll. And now the poll has restarted again. Let me double check, but it might be a technical issue, but if you don't mind re-answering the poll, let's pull up the results in a few seconds. I'm going to stand by and wait just a moment. I'm going to wait 30 seconds. Thank you for bearing with us in terms of the technology. I did not end the poll, but this is the virtual situation we all operate in these days with technology. I'm going to wait a bit longer because there are not that many attendees who've answered the question. So if you can, that would be fantastic. All right, well, I'm going to end the poll now so we can get going in our conversation. Oh, there are still more people voting. Please, actually, let's do 30-second countdown. If you answer the poll, because based on the responses, I'm going to try to keep those thoughts in mind, that the 3 most relevant factors that enable personal empowerment. So if you can answer, I'll keep the 3 themes in mind and ask the panelists what they think about the results. So I will end the poll now. And what we see is there's a slight, of course, split, I believe, because it's in, what is it? Let's see. Yes, there is a slight, so the poll is split in 3 different languages, but what I see is that education comes out as a very important thing. Education, healthcare, and laws. That's what I see in English. Let's go down to Spanish. Let's make sure it kind of tracks. Healthcare, education. Education, it's so top for everything, and healthcare. Okay, so that's fantastic. I'm going to move on. But that hopefully will be sort of the tent poles in our conversation. I do want to start with Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes. Maria, I understand, will have to exit this panel early. So in the interest of making sure we hear more from her, and I thank the other panelists for their patience, Maria, I'd like to front load and ask you a number of questions. So the format will be slightly different with you and I than the rest of the panel. But Maria, my first question is, you have a visual impairment. You are a lawyer. What was the moment when you realized the visual impairment did not have to hold you back from achieving your professional dreams? And Maria, you're on mute on my end. If you can unmute.
Thank you. I have a technical problems. Are there interpretation in Spanish? Are there interpretation in Spanish?
¿Funcionando en español?
Now?
¿Me oyen?
Sí.
Adelante.
Okay. Could you repeat the question, please?
Wonderful. Okay, so my question was that you have a visual impairment and yet you were able to get a law degree. And I'm curious about the moment when you realized that your visual impairment did not have to prevent you from achieving your professional dreams.
Bueno, aparte de la licencia.
Starting with my law degree, I also then got an advanced degree in political science. And in fact, it was never in my mind to think that visual handicap was going to deprive me of my rights. I felt entirely certain that the value of justice meant that I wanted to study law and to be a lawyer. And then after that, I studied political science, which was very complementary with my initial field of study. So I never had that dilemma. I was always certain that I wanted to be a lawyer.
Wow, that's really amazing. And what would you say was the major enabling factor for you to achieve your professional dreams?
Bueno, el factor principal, sí.
Well, the main factor, doubtless, was that I was born being a very studious person. I remember that from the time I was a little girl, I always studied. No one told me I should, but because I liked to. And this was a constant that was repeated over time. And then when I grew up and started studying law, and then later it was very useful when I started participating in the committee that elaborated the Convention for Persons with Handicap. And this was very important to be able to deal with this and to work with persons with disability and to go on studying and studying and working and working. And this was very important. And so the key for me in studying plus persistence plus conviction, and that's in what you're doing.
And that really aligns with the poll results that we have seen, that education and access to education is just absolutely of paramount importance for persons of disabilities to achieve whatever they want in terms of goals. I would say perhaps it's fair to say that it is the key for anyone, regardless of whatever situation you're in. Now, I want to talk, Maria, about this year because you've really talked about the access not to education, but to hospitals during a time of COVID, that it has been a challenge for people with disabilities. And I want to hear more about what you mean.
Bueno,
yes. Well, before I start answering that question, let me add something about young people who are studying and who are listening to this. I did not come from a family that had a lot of money or a lot of useful contacts. And I really need to emphasize that studying and having conviction were very important elements. Now, to go on to the question you asked about people with disabilities during the pandemic. And this reflects the weaknesses of public policy and of service provision. And you can see this, for instance, with hospitals. Intensive care and even respirators. There was considerable doubt as to whether persons with disabilities were going to have access to this type of medical care. And then during the lockdown, all the difficulties we had for access to drugs, to food, to personal care, to psychological care, to exercising people's rights to education or to working at a distance. Now, when I say this, I mean that the challenge has to do with the sustainability of the human rights model of the state. For people with disabilities, people who have any form of disability are confronted with barriers, and this are the things that need to be leveled so as to give people access and to have a world in which they may have access to their rights and the ability to participate. And so this is the challenge for our societies and for our governments.
And of course, that aligns to the poll results as well, because healthcare and access to healthcare came in number 2 across the poll. Maria, I have another question for you. You also talked about the need for smart cities to be, and that as we build smart cities in the 21st century, that we need to be smart about including people with disabilities. What did you mean by that?
lo que yo he dicho que
Well, of course, it's an achievement to make smart cities a reality. But in order for them to be smart, they need to be accessible. That means they have to be accessible to everyone so that they can fully exercise their rights, not only people with disabilities, but also elderly people and people who may be in complicated situations temporarily. What I'd like to highlight is that smart cities must be considered as indispensable prerequisites in terms of accessibility of technology so that they can be used by everyone. This involves everyone being able to be equipped to access this technology. And this is important in terms of remote learning, which has not always been optimal during the lockdown because of accessibility issues.
And in fact, that was the discussion in the previous webinar held today. A lot of people of the panelists talking about accessibility and the technology's role in all of that. That webinar and this webinar will be posted later on YouTube. So I really encourage those who missed the webinar earlier to get a chance to look at that. Thank you so much, Maria. I'm going to move on and open it up to the other panelists. I want to go to Ludivine. You were a competitive swimmer, and then you decided it was a good time to stop. You switched careers, and that's difficult for anyone. But what are some of the things a person with disabilities might need to consider that that others don't have to when they think about making a career switch?
When you're a disabled person, you already have to make the choice to move towards a sports discipline because, like everyone else, you want to access sport and exercise. And I'm aligning myself with what my colleague says before, that we have dreams and we'll do everything to achieve them. In the street, I wanted people to be turning around not because I looked different, but because I was a high-level athlete. And I was able to access sport close to my home, and subsequently I was able to take part in the Paralympics. So when you decide to make a career switch, you really have to take into account many factors, and education is important in terms of reaching employment. So I was wondering, well, what can I do through sport as a disabled person? Well, it allows you to go further on a daily basis. So throughout my career, even though I'd been swimming for a long time, I was thinking about ways that I could continue exercising on a daily basis to keep myself in physical fitness. When you've competed at a high level in sport, when I was in Beijing, for example, I walked across the whole of the city. So it's really a question of ensuring that you keep fit throughout your life.
And Ludivine, what do you think what were the enabling factors in your personal success? I mean, Maria talked about studying hard. Education and health are already coming out as major themes. Would you agree with what Maria said on that?
Indeed, education is key in allowing us to make a career switch. I was lucky enough to study at higher education level in parallel to my sports career. And I think that's important, especially for people with disabilities, because it's more difficult to access studies sometimes. So that really allowed me to move towards a job that was fully integrated in society. So I think it's important to anticipate and to look into what we can do, of course, in complementarity with our dreams. So after I took part in the Paralympics, I was able to be recruited by a company thanks to my professional skills I'd gained through my studies. On a daily basis, if you don't do anything, then no one's going to come and bring you into a new job or into opportunities. So we really have to overcompensate and go beyond what we can do on a daily basis. We really have to follow this dynamic if we want to move forward faster or even at the same speed as everyone else.
And that's where the experience in sports and that competitive edge really helps. I want to move on to Zainab. You have talked about the power of technology to help people with disabilities, technology that wasn't available to you when you were growing up. Could you give us an example? And I think it really aligns also with what Maria was saying about smart cities and needing to think about technology in a different way.
Yeah, so actually, I was born with a vision impairment. Developed nations, developing countries, of course, had nothing. So I used to depend a lot on readers, and my mom used to write for me in large font. So, I mean, my education, of course, I achieved what I wanted to because I wanted to study French. And I did get there to study French, but the readers, like today, if I want to reread, I can do it myself with the accessible books. But at that time, what I missed is a lot of reading, knowledge about the whole world. I could not just read what I wanted to read. And even in the education field, I would have to depend on readers and at their convenience. So I could not revise. I had to learn once and that's it. And being French, it was such a rare thing. Everybody didn't know French.
Right. And so Zainab, if I can continue, I'd be curious because that's why you work on Bookshare, isn't it? What is Bookshare?
Bookshare is an accessible library for people with print disability, which has around 900,000 plus books, which a person can read on his phone or using technology basically. So, I mean, now the person has the liberty to read the way he wants, what he wants, and when he wants. So the freedom comes here, your avenues with the education increase, your access to the world knowledge increases. This is where I say technology is the eyes of the people with vision impairment. And you can increase your knowledge much more by reading all this.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I'm going to go to Jason. Jason, before Azores Valley, was there anything like it in your city of Cali in Colombia?
Bueno, buenos días.
Good afternoon. Indeed. In Colombia, there were very few specialized education centers and they were mainly private. So it was difficult for people with disabilities to access education. They were expensive and private. So what we did was create an institution that was free so that many children could access it. And in Colombia, before, many children ended up staying in bed all day, those with disabilities. So really what we achieved in Cali was creating a free institution and giving access to the poorest children in Cali, especially those with disabilities.
Jason, it's incredible that you've launched Dis Valle. I apologize my Spanish pronunciation on the name of your organization. What would you say has been the biggest keys to your own personal success?
Bueno, definitivamente la educación.
Well, education. My personal story, I remember when I was born, the doctors said that I would only be good for cleaning shoes. And my mum was told to buy a shoe polishing box because that was all that I would be good for. And I would have earned minimum wage. So that's when we started talking about re-education. I ended up in a university. I have two professions. I actually work in the education center and also I do lawyer activism. So education was key for me so that I could realize my dreams. And when you're studying, it gives you opportunities, work opportunities, among others. And education really is essential in the development of people with disabilities.
Thank you so much, Jason. David, you have been very patient. And you've been listening to everyone's stories. I'd like to ask you to reflect on what has been said and provide a few comments. You've weighed in about the impact of work from home during this COVID period. So weigh in on what you've heard so far. And then the second question is, what are some of the challenges of work from home for people with disabilities?
So I think it's really interesting when people talk about education as being important. When you delve a little bit deeper, people break that down into different elements. And it's amazing how much people talk about a teacher or a person or their parents as having driven them, encouraged them, supported them into education, through education to the qualifications and beyond. So I think sometimes we can forget when we're in this discussion that education is not just an institution, but the importance of the people within it, the skills and abilities of the teachers are really important. And that came across when I was listening to people and remembering some of the things you said to me in interviews and in our discussions. To remember it's not just about accessible materials or technology, but quality of teaching and learning. And with that, I remember I made something talk about high expectations. What really pushed people in education, what people really spoke to me about was the high expectations of the people around them and the high expectations they had of themselves.
So it has to do with investment in people, and that is more important, front and foremost. And the technology and the education is important, but it is secondary. You need that resource. And so
implementing all those things requires people. That's the critical element. I think that's what I took away from much of what people said.
Actually, I want to ask you about the work from home, but as a result of your response, I want to bring up one of the questions that's come in, if you don't mind. One of the questions is, on top of the new social distancing norms imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, persons with disabilities have always faced discrimination and been in isolation. How can people with disabilities overcome this discrimination to prevent this barrier and to achieve their goals? I say that because isolation is sort of it's the opposite of human interaction. So I'd be curious about your thoughts on that, David.
I think one of the other things that I've really been thinking quite hard about through this process is that actually it's very difficult to speak of disabled people as a single group who all share the same values, attitudes, life experience, aspirations. Just like it's actually, you can't do that for any group in our societies. And it is strange, we have some people with disabilities arguing strongly that working from home is the most supportive environment they can have, and they really want to work from home. Whereas we have others, and I think our questionnaire is sort of touching upon this, if you make us work from home, our social isolation, our exclusion becomes greater. And one of the things that you have then is a question is, well, how do we change the attitudes? How do we change what people do in the workplace with us if they never really encounter us other than a face on a screen?
Ludovine, I'm curious about what you think. You work in the corporate world. How has work from home impacted, in your opinion, people with disabilities? That's my first question. And my second question is, has the pandemic impacted athletes with disabilities? So work and sports.
Merci, Melissa, pour cette très bonne question. Et je rejoins
Thanks, Melissa, for that excellent question. I entirely share what you have to say, but there is not a single answer about the choice between going on working remotely or having a daily social life. I think the answer is always going to be an individual one. But for some people, it's easier to have some rest days. I'm talking about physical rest, working from home, because it's just a daily challenge to have to be ready at 8:30 or 9 to go to the place where you work, depending on the handicap you're talking about, but to be ready to be there at work 100% of the year. Obviously, being there some of the time is a way to remain in touch, but having distance work is also a way for your body to rest. So let me now go back to Melissa's question. I think there is a path ahead of us to change professional behavior by allowing everyone concerned to have some work and interaction with their employers, with their companies, but also to go on working remotely to have some rest during the week. All of this is part of the ongoing development of distance working that we have at home. We have to think also about people going on being able to do sports. For me, even if I'm not a professional athlete any longer, but simply having sport as part of my leisure time, it's very important to be able to do this, to be able to go on having sport practice with someone who is not disabled, to be able to have tandem bicycle, to be able to go walking with someone walking next to you. Again, here we have to find different ways of having a mixture, for instance, in presential work and distance work, but exactly the same. A bit of sport every day to remain autonomous, but also to remain in some kind of social touch with a colleague.
Great. And we have another question that has been sent in to Zainab. They ask if it's possible to use Bookshare to share articles and resources. So perhaps if you can explain a little bit more what Bookshare is and whether that's possible. Zainab?
Could you repeat, please?
Yes, someone wanted to ask if Bookshare is a platform where they can share articles and resources.
Yes, they can. They can.
And how does that work? Yeah.
They have to write us a mail into Bookshare, and then they can share their articles and resources. We'll have a look at it, make it accessible, and it'll go on the website.
Fantastic. And I've been to your website. It's very, very nice website.
Yes, it is absolutely accessible and friendly because it has to abide by the new norms also, and it is meant for people with the print disability, so it's completely accessible.
Great. I want to then follow up, Zainab, and ask you a little bit more about technology. As I was looking at Bookshare and I was thinking about the work you do, and of course, actually, more so after the webinar that we had, the previous panel that we had, it got me thinking that technology costs money and not everyone has money. So what do you think governments and society need to do in order to make access to technology better for people with disabilities?
So in my opinion, see, most of the governments today are working towards an accessible and a technology world. So computers are a little low cost. There are a lot of global NGOs, local NGOs in the country. Governments do a lot of donation of technology like computers. And if there are a lot of companies do CSR. So what, in my opinion, is that if it's not possible to afford a computer or an expensive form of technology, today, even an Android phone doesn't cost more than $100 anywhere in the world. So if even an Android phone could be given to a person, even he then can access knowledge, access the world, and he will not be isolated, because accessing on a phone today is as equivalent to accessing a computer. If you just attach a simple keyboard and you're good to go, so that becomes like your mini laptop, which I believe would not cost so much more as an expensive piece of technology. Only thing is that it should be distributed to the grassroots. Since I, with Bookshare, work completely with the grassroots people, so I know how they're struggling with technology because they don't have it. Only we should have the right distribution channels to go to the local people right into the villages and identify who needs it the most.
Can I just add to that, Melissa? Because I think
Yes.
the mobile phones issue is a really important one. And Zainab raises that. And I think it's a great point to raise. Many of the people that we looked at, when they talk about technology, they are not talking about computers. When they talk about access, they're talking about having a mobile phone. And I think policymakers find that difficult. They don't yet grasp the importance of a mobile phone. They might think about a tablet, but a phone is actually what many people are using day in, day out to do their banking, to read their books, to identify where those sports events are taking place, to find out where they can listen to things. But often policy mitigates against supporting people have mobile phones. They're not funded, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of replacement. All of these are really important factors, but the mobile phone is the most important technology, I would say, globally at the moment for inclusion of people with disabilities.
Jason, I see you nodding in agreement. Is that what you also think, that the mobile phone is perhaps the most important technology? So I'm curious about your thoughts on that and what David just said. And I'm also curious about how you implement technology at your organization.
Bueno, muy importante lo que hablaban ahorita en la pregunta anterior.
Well, I think that's very important what was said on the last question as well. And in Latin America, it's even more complicated in terms of access to technology, to internet. We're much more limited. Access to internet in particular, and to technology in general for Latin America, or big parts of its population, are very problematic. And obviously even more so for people with disabilities. And to be able to be at home, but to go on working is very difficult, because in fact, without this form of access, they won't have the possibility to work at home. And this whole issue of access for Latin America in general is very important. Technology, internet, compared to Europe, it's difficult to imagine. And for a person with discapacity in Latin America, we have to see the opportunities to work are very limited. If we can figure out ways for people to work more from home, that's essential. Governments in Latin America need to start to think about this and to make technologies available for it.
And that actually kind of flows into something that you've talked about on the Story for Development website, which is that you say your dream is to build the first inclusive education center in Latin America. It's very clearly foremost on your head. In your head, why has it remained a dream and not become a reality? What help do you need to make that happen?
Bueno, mientras ahorita conseguir fondos y estamos como
Funds, basically. We have a project which we're trying to put together with international organizations and others who can contribute to this. But this takes us back to the previous question to see what's happening now. And we see that starting in the school and in businesses as well, in workplaces, there need to be applications for persons with disabilities. And that's the beginning of everything. And we see that things are working more rapidly, more effectively on the technological side. And this is going to hopefully make people have more access to education. And allow people with disabilities to take advantage of these applications of technological developments and to be able to allow people with disabilities to be much better integrated into the world of school.
We do have a question coming in from Ghana. This is a question for all the panelists. He asks, or she asks, they ask, kindly share how positive cultural elements in your communities enabled and supported you. So cultural elements, we've talked about education and health, but the specifics of the social world that you're operating in. I don't know who wants to speak first, but perhaps I could go to Zainab first.
Okay, so socially, as of now, because of the pandemic, it's really bad. People just want to go away. There is total seclusion. Culturally, the same, but otherwise, in the the non-pandemic days, we are totally integrated into the common world, because according to me, we cannot create our own world. We have to have a world which we can integrate into. So the world that is already existing, we have to change ourselves and get integrated into that, is what is my thought on it.
And
So
Ludovic,
for me,
oh, sorry,
yeah.
go ahead, please. I thought you finished, but there's a bit of a lag on my end with the internet. Zainab, please finish your thought.
Yeah, so I feel there is only thing that the people should accept us, and there should be a little more acceptance and trust and faith in what our abilities are. Instead of looking at what we can't, we should look at what we can.
Great, thank you so much. Ludovine, same question. What have been some of the positive cultural elements in your community that has enabled you to achieve what you wanted to achieve?
Revenir justement juste quelques mots sur ce que vient de dire Zainab.
Yeah. I wanted to just go back to what Zainab said also. The importance of being able to include all different people, whatever their difference may be in society, is their ability to understand difference. And I think that thanks candidacy and the fact we'll be able to get ourselves organized to have the Paris Games in 2024, and we'll be able to see the Tokyo Games in 2021 as well. This is a huge worldwide element in terms of visibility of sports in the world, and to make Paralympic sports better known, to let people living with disability known in the world. This is a world we can see that we can have entirely equivalent performances just by running in a different way or swimming in a different way. And I think that the communication we have on a sporting event, and I think that's what the French structures have allowed me to do, is to communicate about people living with disability in all sorts of different social contexts, if it be in school, in the workplace, in sport. And I think we need to take advantage of this international event so as to be able to compare the differences of people living with disabilities, with their talent, with their success, and with the people who support them in their daily lives through access to technology, to communication, non-discrimination in our daily lives today. We are able to do much more for people with disabilities today and to include them in society. And society is also developing in a very positive way. There's still a long road ahead of us, but technology is allowing us to live already very different than has been doing for the last 10 years or so. And 20 years ago, this would have been completely impossible to imagine, but we have to continue along that path because not all countries are on the same level of equality. And we need to communicate and have media attention given to people who are in a situation of disability to understand that they can do so many things.
Ludovine, I definitely want to follow up a little bit more about the Paralympic Games in 2024. But first, let me get to Jason so that he can respond to that question about the positive cultural elements in your community that enabled you to achieve what you've achieved. Jason?
Sí, realmente lo que los colombianos,
What Colombians and Latin Americans see as an important thing in terms of cultural aspects is this persistence, and we're very resilient with real desire to develop. And I think that's a main cultural factor that has helped us to develop. People in Cali are extremely motivated. They're very determined to change their stories. They really have a desire to change the narrative.
David, I'd love for you to weigh in after everyone sort of provided their input. I think it kind of dovetails with what you were saying about everything being human-centered.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's so many variations there. I was in the United Arab Emirates a couple of years ago when the official designation for people with disabilities became people of determination. And at the time, I thought that was a really odd phrase. But now as I listen to people, I'm beginning to think, I'm beginning to understand a little more about what they were trying to say in that. But I think the second thing which comes across really strongly is that idea of self-resilience, the importance of family. You see that as such a strong thread because it's family that provide advocacy before you are able to self-advocate. When you're young, when you're learning your self-confidence, whether it be through sport or the arts, you develop that self-esteem and that self-confidence to advocate for yourself. Until then, it is your family who are your major advocates. But the other group I want to talk about, because I think they're really important, are community organizations. Now, Jason is leading a community organization. But the other thing which I think is so important culturally is the role of community-based organizations, and especially disabled people's organizations led by people with disability. And culturally, the importance and centrality of those in making sure that the nothing about us, without us mantra actually happens. How we treat those community organizations, I think, is a huge cultural variation.
Thank you. I'm so glad that we've been able to get to quite a number of questions during this session. There's one more. I think this is probably going to be the last one that we can get to, but I'm intrigued by it. This says, this person references some personal experience or some kind of experience in the Philippines. The question is about what can be done to integrate creative resilience based on arts training as an essential component of curriculum. or an alternative to the learning system. So the arts, I think there's a tendency to think of education as maths and literacy, but this person wants to talk about the arts, and I would love to hear again from everyone. Maybe actually I'll start with David to sort of set the tone to set the tone for this answer.
I think Ludovine is in a funny way is a great example of this broad area, which is how important sports, arts, in many ways the non-academic element of things that we do as we're growing up are in developing soft skills, whether it be confidence, self-esteem, self-advocacy, determination. And it may be that we're not great at sports, but we're great at that. So music and the arts and sports are more important than perhaps we think they are.
Ludovine, I'm sure you agree, but I'd love to hear additional thoughts. In addition to sports arts, the creative stuff.
J'en dis que c'est une occasion de générer la créativité.
Well, it's an opportunity to promote creativity. It's about personal empowerment. We have to develop each and every one of our capacities. It allows us to escape in a way. And when you're limited physically in terms of your development within society, you have to be able to develop your creative side through culture and arts so that you can also develop your skills. And I think this is important to build a narrative that's full of creativity and takes us further. And I really agree that the determining factor is our determination. And I think art is essential in that.
Zainab, your thoughts?
Yeah, so according to me, arts or any sort of creative pursuance is an amazing thing, because that's how you will come out with what is in your mind. Like I know about someone who does drawing who is visually impaired and who does drawing with a pencil, and that pencil drawing, she makes it tactile, and that's how she's putting her thoughts out. In India, there are a lot of visually challenged people who've made music as their career, and they're so creative. They are just coming out with a lot of thoughts. What is their inner self? And it's not just the book knowledge that they're coming out with, it's their creation, their own art that they are coming out with. So, I mean, according to me, it's just whatever you choose, just choose it with your mind and your thought, what you would like to do. And nothing is impossible. It's like in French, you say, si tu veux, tu peux. If you want, you can.
Fantastic. Now, Jason, I've seen videos of you working with children, and I see art is very central to a lot of that. So I'm sure you have a lot to say about the importance of the creative aspect in education.
En Colombia tenemos una frase.
In Colombia, we often say that if we're going to polish shoes, then we'll do it the best way possible. So in art, if we get involved in art, we want to do it professionally, and the same goes for music. So art is offered often as a summer study, but actually we wanted to focus on it in a professional aspect. It can become a profession: music, culture, classical arts. So art is not just something that you should do in a summer school. For people with disabilities, it can be something professional. if it's well done. And they're preparing for an artistic profession. So if we are going to do art, then we have to be the best at doing art.
Fantastic. Well, we have 5 minutes left to our 1 hour panel. It has gone by very quickly for me. So I would love to ask each of you a sort of final question and allow you to have your final thoughts. Why don't I start with Ludivine? I said I wanted to ask about the Paralympics in 2024. And my question is, what will we expect in terms of innovations in 2024 that we should keep an eye on at the Paralympic Games?
D'ici 2024, on peut déjà attendre d'avoir des jeux
We can expect extraordinary games because we're organizing Paralympic Games that have the same visibility as the Olympic Games. I think that's already a strong message that we're giving the same importance to these two competitions, which will be taking place under the same event. In terms of technology, we'll be allowing all startups with innovative ideas to work to put them at the service of people with disabilities. There's a lot of ideas being developed at the moment. For example, location aid for those with visual impairments so that they can find their way around without having to look for the exit for half an hour. Or being able to have instant access for those people who cannot walk as fast as others to be able to find the entry or the exit much faster. So what we're doing is trying to find these startups who will increase accessibility for sport or in other areas so that we can improve the daily lives and the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games experience better for people with disabilities. And many innovative ideas will be promoted during these games.
Thank you. I certainly look forward to 2024 and seeing all of this. It's very exciting. And Zainab, looking to 2021, I'm curious what Bookshare's plans and goals are. What are your goals for Bookshare in next year?
Our goal is to reach out to maximum people and to give most of the students the book that they desire. I personally, if you ask me, I want to see each student going with his people with vision impairment or any disability with print disability, going to the first day of their school with a book and sitting side by side with their sighted counterpart and studying the same way that they do. If the teacher tells to open to page 40, even the print disabled student opens and studies the same time and not wait for his books to be coming after 1 month, 2 months. At least that's the case in developing countries where books are not freely available for people with print disability. They have to wait. So my goal is, whether be it any language, have a book for every print disabled. I do not want them to suffer the same way I did so.
Thank you. Jason, I'd like to ask you a question that was posted and answered by somebody. They were asking about how to increase awareness about access to education. It seemed to make a lot of sense for me to push that question your way. Your final thoughts on increasing awareness for persons with disabilities and their access to education. How do we do that?
Well, we have to continue raising awareness so that people with disabilities are encouraged to study, so that people realize that people with disabilities experience a lack of opportunities in Latin America. So we need to encourage them that they can achieve this, and we have to educate the people around them as well. The governments also have a major role to play. On a daily basis, in the daily lives of these people with disabilities, we have to promote the importance of education. So governments in Latin America have to address this issue, and we have to motivate people with disabilities to study, to increase their skills, to become professionals so that they can have these opportunities.
Thank you so much. David, I want to end with you because there are a lot more stories on the storyfordevelopment.org site. And in just the last minute here, give us a sense of what's going on there to encourage people to check it out after this webinar ends.
It's such a diverse range of stories. I hesitate to use the word inspirational because it's had bad connotations in the disability community. But what it really hits you is just how much people are achieving in their own lives for all sorts of reasons. And they achieve them in many, many different fields. So I think it's the inspiration of how people have the confidence to take themselves forward. Those stories will give you those examples. I think in really understanding for anybody working in this field, the experience, the lived experience of people with disabilities and what they did to achieve what they've achieved. That's where Stories for Development is important. And I would just like to echo a couple of things that I think were said there, that getting involved in sports, arts, books, as well as the workplace and health and so on, that's what defines us as being part of a society. It's access to the culture of that society. If we don't make those settings accessible, people with disabilities never get the chance to fully contribute and to fully participate. And what comes across in the stories is if you give us the opportunities, if you create something that is accessible, we will take those opportunities because we can prove what we can do. That's what will hit you in the stories, I think.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you to the panelists and thank you to those tuning in. Once again, I encourage you to check out the website and have a good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are. Thank you.
Merci, au revoir.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was very wonderful.
Thank you.
Do we have a host that wants to throw up the slate?